my name is Melanie Brummer and I'm the author of Contemporary Dyecraft with Metz Press. Today I'm going to teach you a number of different techniques for working with my house brand of dye, and all of the projects that you see around me are in the book Contemporary Dyecraft. Let me teach you how to fall in love with fabric. Over here we've got the equipment that we're going to use to tie up the fabrics. There are some elastic bands, different kinds of string, a scissor to cut the string, there's a fork and a pair of vice grips which we're going to use to tie up the spirals. Now the vice grips have quite sharp tips and there is a chance that you make a hole in your fabric when you use them, so I've coated them with some epoxy glue just to make them padded so that they don't damage your fabric. When you first start working with the fabric that you want to tie up, I recommend that you wash it in your washing machine. I don't like to work with dry fabric myself. It's very springy and awkward to work with. It doesn't stay where you put it when you fold it. Also, it doesn't absorb the dye very easily because very often it's coated with starches and other chemicals that they put on it in the mill. I also don't like working with very, very wet fabric. It makes me sopping wet from head to foot by the time I've finished working with it, and then it also has the tendency to suck onto the surfaces where you're working, and that's not pleasant either. My favorite is fabric straight from the spinner. You've washed it in your washing machine and it's still slightly damp. It is easy to handle. It stays where you put it when you fold it, and it also absorbs dye easily. For our first project, we're going to work with string. Here I've got a ball of very thick string and a ball of much thinner overlocking thread. It's entirely up to you which you are more comfortable working with. I much prefer working with a thinner string, and it happens to work out much cheaper for your projects. If you place the ball of string on the table and try to work with it, it's going to roll around and give you no end of trouble while you're trying to manipulate the fabric. So I actually put the ball of string down on the ground. If it's lower than you are and you reel off the thread like this, you can see it comes off quite painlessly, and that leaves you free to wrestle with your fabric. So you take the fabric and you just make a ball. As the name implies, you crush the fabric up like this. This is a super technique to do with children because even very small children can manage it. And you'll notice I didn't even tie a knot in the thread. I just started winding. And you wind the string tighter and tighter around the ball. Obviously, the tighter you tie the string, the more white areas you're going to have on the finished project. If you wind the string very loosely, you will have fewer white areas on the finished project. The size of your project is also going to affect how much white and how much cover you'll end up with. Once all the folds are in place, I just loop the string under once or twice. To tie it off. The next one that we're going to do is camouflage. I also like to call this one brains because by the time you've finished binding it up, that's a bit what it looks like. You just scrunch the fabric up under your fingertips to create an even creasing all across the surface of the cloth. Then you take your string just push it down with your thumb in the middle of the bundle. Don't worry about tying a knot, and start to work around and around in circles from all sides with the string. And as you go, you gradually pull it tighter and tighter. This is a wonderful technique for creating urban camouflage on your clothing. I've created many pairs of very nice camouflage trousers using this technique, and it's also a very valuable technique for quilters because it gives you a very nice texture for your cloth. You want to work around the bundle from all directions. Don't be scared to wrap it even across the sides and the edges. By pulling the string tight around the edges of the shape, you will secure your bundle far more quickly than if you just work straight across the center. If the string breaks, don't panic, just start again and keep going. You're going to put quite a lot of string around this, so it doesn't really matter. You'll just tie that end back in the process. Once it looks like you've secured the whole of the top surface, it helps to turn the bundle over and do the same on the bottom. Once you're sure that the bundle is secure, you can break your string and loop the thread under the way we did with the ball. The next one that we're going to try is electricity. You take the fabric along the base of the cloth, and this is a very nice one to do with kids also. It's quite easy enough for them to cope with. And you gather the fabric up all along the hem. The key is to make sure that all of this fabric lines up here. Then you pull the cloth down to make the folds nice and straight. And this is a very nice technique that I use for helping me with the tying. You pull the fabric down below the edge of the table and you wedge it in behind your leg, and it creates a vise so that you then have two hands free to struggle with the elastic bands. And these elastic bands want to be very, very tight so that you get a nice clear pattern. And they want to be in an open position running down the length of the cloth. Once it's finished, this fabric is going to have a lovely electrical pattern running in a stripe along the base of the cloth. The next technique that we're going to try is a marbled finish on silk. This is a chiffon silk that I've pre-washed. You start somewhere near the edge of the fabric is logical, and you pull it down like this. And again, I'm going to use my leg as a wedge just to support the fabric to assist me to get this elastic band on very, very, very tight. Because this fabric has such a loose weave, it needs to be completely constricted by the elastic band in order for you to get a clear pattern. This is quite a time-consuming technique, and although it's very beautiful, it will take you a while to finish this project. From there, you find another convenient space on the fabric and you pull it down, and the idea is that you're actually going to put elastic bands all the way from here to where that elastic starts over there. you actually want the elastic bands to run edge to edge all over the surface of the cloth. There they now meet, and I'm going to go and look for the next place to start the next one. There's a little bubble over here, that's always a good place to start. Pull the creases down. And we're going to find another place. And you'll continue in this manner until the whole piece of cloth has been used up. The next one that we're going to try is circles. Everybody likes to see spots on clothing, so you simply start by choosing a center for your first circle. You pull the fabric up. Again, we wedge it behind the leg, and here you want to put on a very, very tight elastic band. In this case, you want to pile the elastic up in one place so that it makes a very bold, clear white stripe. And if you think about it, your circle is going to be twice this size. So when it's finished, it's going to be like that. Then you decide where you want the next circle to be, and you do the same again. It helps to pull the creases down smoothly because this will give you a very clear round shape. If you don't pull the creases down nicely like that, the shape can be distorted. And if you want spots all over, you'll do it again. Let's look at this. This circle is going to be this big, and this circle here is only going to be that big. In this way, you're able to control the size of the mark that you want to make. Also, don't be afraid to run the shape off the edge of the cloth. I sometimes find that running the shapes right off the edge of the cloth has a much more natural look than if they all float within the boundaries of the fabric. Obviously, if you start the shape from the edge of the cloth like this, you're only going to get half a circle on the cloth. If you want to put spots all over the fabric, you continue doing that until everything is full. The next one we're going to try is a target. You decide where you want the center of your target to be. You smooth out the creases, and once again you wedge the fabric in behind your leg, and start with a very, very tight elastic band as we did with the last one. From there, you work with another elastic band and you move it down an equal distance and do the same thing again. And if you're running out of fabric, you can turn it around for the third elastic band. This is going to give you 3 concentric circles placed at even distances apart. Targets are really simple to make and quite effective. If you look at any tie-dye in front of you, you can normally work out how it was made. The marks are a map of how it was put together. Let's see how we made this pattern. We've already discussed round shapes and how they start, and this one will start the same way. You choose the center of your circle and you pull the fabric up in the usual way. Smooth down your folds and grab an elastic band. This time, we're going to open the elastic band up instead of piling it up all in one place. Again, it needs to be very tight to give us a nice clear white shape. Let's see how it looks. So in order to make a pattern like this on the cloth, you would just make lots of these very, very close together all over the fabric. Now this is also the basis for a floral shape. If you want to create a flower, you can make the center smaller and get a very beautiful floral shape. Let's see how we do that. You would simply take another elastic band and close up the shape. Cobwebs are a favorite around Halloween to make Halloween outfits. For this one, I'm going to use string again, but because I want to pull it quite tightly, I'm actually going to double the string up a few times. A cobweb is once again a rounded shape, so it's going to start in much the same way as the other rounded shapes that we've already made. I run the string down the length of the cloth, then I just hold it in place with my thumb and I start to wind it around the fabric very, very tightly. Then you want to move down at even spacing, and this is what's going to create the beautiful cobweb shape. When I get near the end of my string, you want to pull it very tight and then loop it under a couple of times so that it doesn't come loose in the dye. I love to work on silk, and these silk scarves make wonderful accessories for almost any outfit. You're in control of which direction you want the striping to run in. On this piece of silk, they're running diagonally across the cloth, while on this one, they're actually running parallel with the selvedge of the fabric. Let's see how it was made. It's quite logical actually when you start to look at it this way. Here I have my silk that I've prepared beforehand. It's been through the washing machine and it's still wet. I've made sure that the string is nearby so that once I've got the coil in place, I don't have to go hunting for it. So we start with the corner, and you want to pull the fabric down and allow it to relax out all the way down the length. Then, as you saw before, I'm going to hold it in my hand like this and create the coil around my fingers. Once I've coiled up the entire length of the cloth, I support it on the table, and then you want to just tie it quite loosely with the string to hold those coils in place. This is not one that you want to tie very tightly with the string because then it might constrict the fabric, and we want the dye to go all the way through the layers. We're just using the string here to make sure that the coils stay in place. Once again, I just loop the thread underneath once or twice, and that will be sufficient to hold the coils in the dye. For this example, I'm going to work on a piece of calico. Calico is a favorite with quilters. If you look at a tie-dye and see a straight line running across it, then it was made by a straight fold. A straight fold is the basis of all geometric patterns. Evenly spaced fan folds are the basis for all geometric patterns. Don't panic when you get to the end of the fabric. Just pretend it's all one continuous thing. This technique will produce evenly spaced stripes running down the length of the fabric. If this is going to give us straight lines, parallel lines, then it's quite logical to think that by folding the fabric in the other direction, we can create checks. Once all the folds are in place, you can get a couple of rubber bands to tie up the bundle. You want the elastic band to go across the center of the shape in this direction, and then you do the same thing in the other direction. The parallel fan fold is the basis for a whole bunch of different geometric techniques. That's where your zigzags, your diamonds, and even the crosses will begin. All you need to do different for those is to add a couple of other folds, either at 90-degree angles or at 45-degree angles, and you're able to change the whole pattern. So, by creating these same parallel fan folds in this way, you can make a diamond shape. By pulling the fabric up like this, I'm just getting rid of all the creases between the multiple layers of cloth. Here you can bind it up either with string or with very tight elastic bands. I'm going to start with the string. You run the string down the length of the bundle. In that way you'll be able to actually tie it in. I just secure it with the tip of my forefinger, and then I start to wind the string around the cloth. You'll notice that I actually run the string across the surface of the table instead of trying to pick up the bundle. When you're working on something as small as this, it is sometimes possible to pick it up, but if you're working on a very, very big project, you don't want to disturb your folds, and this is the easiest way of binding it up without the whole thing coming apart. You'll also notice that I've been careful to space the bindings quite evenly. Once again, I end it off by just looping it under a couple of times. I don't like to tie knots in the string because then I need to use a pair of scissors to undo them, and very often when you're in a hurry you will cut a little hole in the fabric. Binding the bundle like this with string will give you a snakeskin pattern, but if you want very clear, sharp lines, you can add some elastic bands over the string. Because we've already tied it up, it now means we can lift it up and it's easier to handle. Here you might also want to use your leg as a vise when you get further down. The next one that we're going to make is a spiral. The binding technique is also the basis for your zebras and your spikes, and it's actually quite easy to do. I've started here with a rather large piece of silk, so I'm going to actually fold it in half so that it's more manageable. And because it's got a center fold in it, the pattern will be repeated on the fabric. You choose the place where you want the center of your spiral to be, and you create a crease in the cloth. Then you attach the vice grips to that crease and you start to twist. You want to smooth the folds out nicely as it winds itself up. Once all the creases are in place, you can loosen the vice grip and remove it, Here you need to be quite careful because sometimes it will pull the whole thing apart. Now you just tighten it all up and put on 3 elastic bands. It's quite important that you use 3 elastic bands. You'll see why when we start to dye the thing. And it's also quite important that they cross over the center of the twist of your bundle. I've already taken you through most of the binding patterns, and all that's left now is to show you how to do a stitched shape. We're going to make a heart on cloth. We start by folding the fabric in half. Because a heart is 2 shapes that are mirror imaged, it's possible to fold and then stitch it in. I'm going to use this dressmaker's chalk to draw a guideline along which I'm going to work. Now I need to thread my needle, and this time I'm going to ask you to work a little counterintuitively. I would like you to thread the needle and create a double thread. It needs to be quite strong because we're going to pull against it. And then at the end, I would like you to make a very big, very ugly, fat knot. This knot is going to act as an anchor for your pattern. And if it is too small, the thread might punch right through the cloth. You start your first stitch very, very close to the edge of the fabric. And you do even running stitches all along the chalk line. Now here again, you need to work counterintuitively. Small stitches are not ideal. You want big, wide open stitches because they'll be easier to gather up in the end. Now when you get round to this part of the heart, you actually need to overcompensate a little. The pattern tends to distort here in the point of the V, and sometimes your heart shape will become quite shallow over here. So what I do is I overcompensate and I end the stitching a little bit further down than what I've drawn. And again, you want to come out of the fabric very, very close to the edge. Then you want to gather up the thread. You'll notice that I'm trying to line up the gathers so that all the orange marks are in a straight line. A little bit of pulling sometimes also helps here, depending on the stiffness of your cloth. Once I have the fabric nicely gathered, I then need to bind it off very, very tightly. And the key here is to cross your thread over the orange line and over both the entrance and the exit points of the thread. Now at this point, I also like to add an elastic band. If you put a very, very tight elastic band on here, you get a nice clear white border on your heart. And now for the fun stuff. We're going to start mixing dye. What you see here is some of the equipment that we'll be using, and it's very basic stuff that you very likely already have in your home. There are some latex gloves, face mask to protect your lungs, some syringes for syringing the dye onto the cloth. You can never ever have enough buckets, stirring implements to mix the chemicals, thermometer, some crocodile clips, plastic bags, and my good friend, the microwave oven. What are the requirements for dye to be color fast? Firstly, you need to make sure that you have the correct fabric source. Then the chemicals must be present at optimum levels. You need water. The reaction only happens in suspension. You also need heat. The water must be heated by some sort of means. And finally, the one thing that people often overlook is the time factor. This is not an instant chemistry. It needs time to work. Before we start working with a color, we need to understand a few things about the chemistry first. When you walk into a store to buy dye, you're normally faced with two choices on the shelf. One box of dye says cold and the other box says hot. But very few of us know exactly what that means. When they investigated the chemistry and they were developing the dyes, they discovered that there were two trends. One trend meant that the dye needed to be boiled for it to be color fast, so they called it hot. The other trend showed that the dye did not need to be boiled for it to be color fast, so they called it cold. Now, although this seems completely logical, the optimum temperature of a cold water dye is 65 to 70 degrees. Just to give you some sort of an idea, the highest setting on your geyser is 70 degrees. That is steaming hot. What happens when you walk into the store and you buy a box of hot water dye? The person who buys the hot dye is buying for reliability. They will go home and boil the dye on the stove. Having gone to such lengths, they expect the dye to be very, very color fast. The reality is that the cold dye's chemistry is far more robust, and a cold dye will stay color fast after many more washes than what a hot dye will. The person who buys the cold dye, on the other hand, is very often in a hurry and buying for convenience. This means that they seldom read the directions when they get home. They'll take the dye, throw it into a pot of cold water, and expect it to work for them. Can you understand why there are so many people who've had bad experiences when working with dye? It is important to understand that we are working with translucent color. What that means is that the color is see-through. If you put it against a white background, the colors will be clear and sharp. If you put it over a black background, it will have very, very little effect. While it's important to know how the chemistry works, what many people forget is that half of the process actually lies in your choice of cloth. Dye is fiber specific. That means that every single fiber has a specific dye stuff that works on it. A lot of people are under the impression that it's a one-stop solution. When I used to work for the fashion industry, I had a fashion designer who would phone me regularly and say, "Melanie, I have a job for you." I would hop in my car, drive over to Rosebank, and get there only to find that the cloth that he'd supplied was not suitable for my purposes. So one day I said to him, "Let's do an experiment so that you can see exactly why it is that I cannot work on your cloth." We took a selection of fabrics that are not suitable for natural dye stuffs, and we cut them into swatches and put them onto these cable ties. We took one of these and put it aside so that we would have a control to understand how the fabrics looked before we had put them in dye. And then we experimented with different dyes. First, we started with a red dye, which was specific for cotton fabrics. This is hardly a red result. Most of the fabrics didn't take the color at all. Those that did are actually varying shades of peach. The one fabric on here that fascinates me is this one. It looks like cotton, it feels like cotton, but the chemistry shows us that it definitely is not cotton. We then went on to a different brand of dye designed for cottons, and it was a purple. And here we got a completely different set of results. What I find most fascinating about this set is what we're looking at over here. Firstly, this is not a cotton fabric. Secondly, the purple dye that we used for this is made up of pink and blue in a blend. Here, the pink took on the fabric, but this one here is distinctly blue in color. Now, if you think that this was in the same container of dye at the same time, it is conclusive proof that different fabrics will favor different colors in the blend in different ways. We then moved on to a purple dye designed for nylon fabrics and got a whole new set of results. We experimented with another nylon dye. This one was a royal blue, and again, a different set of results. Finally, we moved on to a dye that is suitable for wool and lycra, and all the lycra in this set took the dye beautifully. This was a navy blue. What's very interesting about all of these is this piece of polyester lace over here. It didn't take any of the dye in any of the sets. I hope this has helped you to understand why your choice of fabric is as important as your choice of dye when you start your projects. Now let's talk about the chemicals. Over here in pack number 1, we have the dye. That's the color that we want to put on the cloth. Don't be surprised that the powders are not the same color as the liquid that you'll end up with in the bucket. Most of the dyes look brown. In pack number 2, we have salt. It's the catalyst that makes the colors brighter. In pack number 3, we have the soda ash, and that is what actually binds the color with the cloth on a molecular level. Many of you may have gone to the flea market and bought a t-shirt there, and the guy says to you, "Go home and wash it in salt, and that will stop the color from running." It actually doesn't work at all. The salt is only there to make the colors brighter. It is not the chemical that binds the colors permanently to the cloth. For this little exercise over here, I'm going to talk about these two chemicals, the dye and the soda ash. They have a one-to-one relationship. The dye and the soda ash bind together to make a permanent molecular bond on the cloth. Let's try to figure out how this reaction works. These two chemicals react on a one-on-one basis to form a permanent bond. Just after you've added the chemicals to the pot, you have lots of dye, lots of soda ash, and no bonded material. As time passes, you will have some dye, some soda ash, and a little bit of bonded material. A little bit further down the timeline, and you will have less of the dye, less of the soda ash, and much more of the bonded material. Eventually, you will end up with a whole lot of the bonded material and no more dye and no more soda ash. The challenge is that the mixture that is in the pot looks the same to the naked eye, and you cannot see whether there is any of the active ingredient left or whether it's all bonded material. And unfortunately, this bonded material does not unbond again, and it no longer has the ability to fix permanently with cloth. Let's look at that one more time. What are the requirements for the dye to be color fast? Firstly, you need to make sure that you've selected the correct fabric. Then you need to make sure that your chemicals are present at optimum levels. The reaction will also only happen suspended in water. You will need heat to drive the reaction. And we cannot forget that all of this is going to take some time. Let's draw a graph to see how it works in more detail. On this axis, I'm going to put heat. And on this axis over here, I'm going to put time. Over here, we have the optimum temperature of 65 degrees Celsius. Now let's look at what happens to the different colors as you put them into the mixture. Some of them, the reaction will peak out and taper off in this way. Other colors may do something like this. Certain colors will taper off very quickly. While other colors might taper off more slowly. It's because of this that you can only really control the color right here at the beginning of the reaction when everything goes in at the optimum temperature. As the dye cools, over time, the reaction becomes less and less effective, more of the chemicals become used up, and over here you can no longer control the final color that you're going to get. That is why dye that you reuse or recycle has an unpredictable color that you need to just accept when it comes out of the dye bath. We're going to work with slipstream fabric dye, which is a cold reactive dye, and all the chemicals are pre-packed at optimum quantities in the packaging. It's always a good idea to work with latex gloves to protect your hands. So before you start, put on your gloves and let's go. This is the fail-safe technique for working with the dye, and definitely the most reliable. I've heated some water in a pot on a gas bottle, and now I'm going to stir in the dye until all the lumps are dissolved. It's quite important to stir out all the lumps before you add in any of the other chemicals, because the salt affects the solubility of the dye powder. Once I'm sure that all the lumps are gone, I'm going to stir in the salt. Now I'm going to stir in the fabric. At this point, I'm going to check the temperature of the liquid before I add the soda ash. The dye is definitely 65 degrees Celsius, which is the optimum temperature for the product to work. And it's a good time to add the soda ash. Now you'll stir the fabric for another 10 minutes to batter it nicely into the fiber of the fabric. After 10 minutes, you can take it off the heat and leave it to stand overnight. Let's see how this technique met the criteria of the chemistry. I selected the correct fabric source. The chemicals went in at optimum levels. We definitely had water in the pot and it was hot. And we gave the reaction time to work. We also worked over here where the chemicals were most effective. So this fabric should take the dye nicely. We've demonstrated the fail-safe way of doing this. Now let's see how we can do it more easily. I recommend that you get all of your equipment ready beforehand so that you can work quickly. You start by boiling the kettle and you will pour the fresh, boiling, steaming water into the bucket. Now you want to work fast before the liquid loses its heat. First, you're going to stir in the dye powder. You stir in the dye until you're rid of all the lumps. Then you want to add the salt. Once it's completely dissolved, you stir in the fixative. Finally, you add the fabric while the liquid is still steaming hot. Jiggle it around a little bit. just to drive the colour right into the cloth. And finally you put a sinker on top just to make sure that the fabric stays underneath the surface of the liquid. Where the fabric floats above the liquid, it will make a very distinctive mark that people will notice. Let's see if we've met all the requirements of the chemistry. I selected 100% cotton fabric. The chemicals came out of the bags at optimum levels. There's water in the bucket and it's still steaming hot. I'm going to leave it in the bucket overnight to give the chemistry time to happen. So far, we've taken a look at two different ways of getting the dye onto the fabric: stirring it into the pot or submerging it completely underneath the fluid. But what if we just want to dye a small piece? Here, I've pre-mixed the dye with all the chemicals in, and I just want to dye the bottom piece of this cloth across the pattern. So I'm just going to lower it into the fluid and clamp it to the side of the bucket. This way it can stand safely overnight without falling in completely, and it will give the reaction time to happen. Many people ask me how to get different colors onto one piece of fabric. It's a matter of putting the different colors on one after the other. I'm going to demonstrate the dipping technique where we move from the yellow into the pink and finally into the turquoise. The secondary colors will actually mix on the cloth. I've mixed the dye in cold liquid to give us time to work and play. If you mix the dye in cold water, it's also a very good technique for working with kids, because then you don't have to worry about them burning on hot liquids. I'm going to start by dipping the silk first into the yellow. It's very important that we work up to the center line. So you dip the fabric in and you jiggle it around a bit. It is a physical process to get the dye in between all the layers of the cloth. If you just dip the fabric in and pull it out, you will have large white spaces on your end result. You might even want to squeeze it a little bit and then push it back into the dye. At this point, you want to turn the fabric, and we're going to move on to the pink, and we're going to cross over one of the slices of the yellow. I'm just tipping the bucket a little bit so that we can get the liquid up to the middle line again. And now for the final color, the turquoise. I'm going to turn the bundle again, and this time I'm going to cross the dye over the pink and the yellow. I always say that with dye, the color wheel comes alive. It moves out of the theoretical space and into reality. Once I've worked the color thoroughly into the cloth, I'm going to move the bundle across into a plastic bag and wrap it up. If you would like a little bit more control over where the dye goes than what you can get out of dipping in a bucket, you can use a syringe. We're going to make the same sample that we did with the dipping. Once again, we're working up to the middle line where the elastic crosses over the twist. Keep applying dye until you can see it running straight through the bottom of the bundle. Now I'm going to move on to the pink, and we're going to cross over one of the slices of the yellow. Finally, we're going to move on to the blue, and we're going to cross over one slice of pink and one slice of yellow. In this way, you're able to control exactly where the color goes. We did the last two examples using cold dye, and now we need to heat it up so that the color will be color fast. We're going to create a primitive steamer, and to do this you need to use a couple of plastic bags. It doesn't matter if you use recycled bags for this. You're going to take the bundle in the plastic bag and put it into a second bag and twist it up. Then you're going to put it into a third bag. 3 bags will ensure that you don't have too much moisture running out into your microwave oven. You will notice that I haven't tied a knot. If you do, the bag will expand with the steam and explode, giving you a massive fright. You can just put it onto the plate in the bottom of the microwave oven and switch it on. The question is always how long you need to heat it for. That will depend on a couple of factors. Firstly, how strong is your microwave oven? Secondly, how big is your bundle? And thirdly, what kind of fabric are you heating? You need to be quite careful with silk because otherwise you can burn it. Cotton will withstand greater temperatures. This particular bundle I'm going to heat for 2 minutes on medium-high. My best advice is that you err on the side of caution. Put the bundle in for a little while. See if it's hot when you take it out, and if it isn't, turn it over and put it in for a little bit longer. Look at that, it's steaming hot. You can set up a series of buckets with clean water for washing out your bundle. At no stage during the washing process should you stop and leave the fabric lying in a wet crush. That's a very good way to mess up a fresh tie-dye. Once you've rinsed away all the excess dye, you can lay the fabric out flat somewhere to dry. Let's see how our tie-dye looks. It's a good idea to rinse off the worst of the excess dye in a bucket before you take off the bindings. Let's see what we've got inside. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. If you would like some more information about Metz Press books, you can go online to metzpress.co.za. And if you would like to learn more about fabrics and how to embellish them, you can visit my website at dyeandprints.co.za.
Uh-huh.